I love the feeling at the National Archive. The inscription on the statue reads, "History is but prologue." I think that is profound. My presentation is about my experience digging in the National Archives for Mormon Battalion war documents. The principles I have learned here will apply to other military records as well. In 2010, my husband Craig and I made our first trip to the National Archives. We went into a huge library where the stacks were about 40 feet long and 9 or 10 feet high. My husband walked over and reached for a single book. It turned out to be Fremont's report to Congress concerning his Western exploration. We also located a copy of Stansberry's report to Congress of his trip to Utah. I fell in love with the insight that these men shared. At Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland, we located Frederick Lander's Wagon Road Company field book. This map from December 1858 of the Immigrant Trail calls Rock Creek by that name. This is 2 years prior to any other source. That turned out to be a big find. This was my first delve into paramilitary groups. I found it amazing, all of the journals and field books that Lander kept. Here are the Lander collection of books at Archives 2. With this information, a cartographer could put their trail on the ground exactly where they crossed it. In this collection, there is another box of letters as well. At the Library of Congress, there is a whole nother collection for Lander. It amazes me, the wealth of information that is available. On our 2012 trip, I did my family research in the homestead records for my Utah and Iowa families. The Andresses, Mathesons, Elders, Mortensons, Galings, and Junkers. We also researched the rescuers of the ill-fated handcart companies and got my first taste of pension files about the Mormon Battalion men. Eliza Salmon, Edward Martin's widow, tells us she came across the ocean in 1856, but to Utah in 1863. This straightened out some identities in the Martin Handcart Company. The pension office sent out an inspector who interviewed her alone and agreed to keep her secret that Edward Martin was not the father of her first 2 children. She had forgone her pension for 10 years to keep this secret at this point. I figured I had now done all I needed at the National Archive. What more could I possibly need? So in 2015, when I received an impression I needed to go back to the archives, I argued with myself and then made reservations for the plane, the hotel, and the car, etc. 2 weeks to go, and my husband took me out to dinner. I got a call from Kevin Henson, who told me he had found out that there were actual muster and payrolls for the Mormon Battalion in the National Archives. I was confused. Why wouldn't there be? He said that people had figured for over 100 years that they had been lost. Suddenly, I knew why I was going. The researchers had relied on a variety of documents. One group relied on Daniel Tyler's book. Another, the Mormon Battalion return lists for Company A, B, and E, which were created in Council Bluffs in 1846 for tracking the families so that they'd be able to take care of the families for the men. These lists were created in at least duplicate, as we have 2 different copies of the list for Company A. These lists have men listed that volunteered but did not go. The researchers had also relied on the compiled military service record cards, these also known as the CMSR cards. These again had people listed who never went. For a good study into who went and who did not, See Correcting the Record by Christine Forbes, soon to be on the MormonBattalion.com website. A few men were listed on the cards for the first muster roll, with a note saying, "Not carried on subsequent rolls." On most of the lists, they were listed as if they had gone all the way. I talked to the staff at the National Archives, asking what records were used to make the CMSR cards, and could I see them. They told me that the CMSR cards were all anyone needed, that they were extremely accurate. I told them that we had studied the cards and they caused more problems for our unit than they solved. The supervisor started looking for muster and payrolls for me. We located the ones from Company C and E. This particular record is a pay record for Company E. The muster rolls named every person in the company and accounted for their service, as well as noting whether they had died, were sick, detached, were discharged, or deserted. You can see how valuable a record this would be to name every person in the company every 2 months from muster in to muster out. With these new records, it's kind of hard to get mixed up as to who went. We still had 3 companies with no records. I knew what I was looking for now, but I didn't know where else to look. Upon getting back to the church history archives, where I had spent the last 5 years working as a missionary, I started looking for all of the lists concerning the battalion that had been used in the past and came upon the Joseph Fielding Smith MS 2656 collection, which had a letter from the adjutant to Senator Smoot saying that there were 45 existing muster rolls in the Army adjutant's collection. Senator Smoot was told that the adjutant had no staff for making lists. So Smoot sent over staff who were sent to the CMSR cards, which had the same mistakes in them. This was in 1927. In a letter from Smoot to Joseph Fielding Smith, Smoot says, "In regards to the attached list of members of the Mormon Battalion, the names are taken from the official index of the Old Records Division. Translation, the AINSWORTH files, also known as the CMSR cards." Now when Joseph Fielding Smith got the list, he wrote to Senator Smoot, "I am very glad to obtain the list, as we have never had what we could consider an authentic record, having depended largely on Daniel Tyler. He didn't understand that there were a couple of authors who had already used the CMSR cards." He goes on to say, "Sorry to put you to so much trouble, but historically this is of great value." Now we understand the problem and why I'm going to the National Archives. How do we correct this record? In 2017, I was meeting with Professor Jill Crandall, director of BYU's Center for History and Genealogy, one day, and she mentioned she was going to the National Archives. I had another strong impression that I should go. Professor Crandall got these there a day ahead of me, and by the time I got there, Craig Scott and others had given her a list of 10 places to look for the rest of the 45 muster and payrolls. We looked in Record Group 217, UD 569, and located Peter Fife's 3-month extra pay document, where he tried to get paid for his trip home, which was interesting because he wasn't in the battalion. But there were no muster or payrolls in this collection. It was the Ainsworth staff that created the CMSR cards. Ainsworth took important documents and put them in his files. These files are in Record Group 94, Entry 501. We located a number of things. One, a letter from James Allen with a list of officers of the battalion with a plea to have them commissioned which never happened, but no muster or payrolls. In record group 153, box 159, we located the court-martial papers of John Allen, the only man drummed out of the Mormon Battalion, but still no 45 muster and payrolls. In record group 217, entry 101, also known as the Manning Collection, we located receipts from officers of the Mormon Battalion for gear entrusted to them. As the animals wore out, these companies had to leave gear, which without these papers would have been charged to the officer's account and docked from their final pay. Manning was another archivist who went around collecting things he found interesting. Still, no muster or payrolls. There were other collections that were suggested that had no Mormon Battalion content at all. So where were the rolls? And why had no one else located them? The last collection they had told us to look in was part of record group 217. In that collection, there are 1,599 boxes. We didn't want to start that group until we had exhausted every other possibility. Here, a research librarian located an old index in record group 217, entry 527, listing the Battalion of Missouri and Iowa Volunteers. In it, there were references to old box numbers. I had seen these on the Company C and E documents. I noticed that the old numbers, although not on the current boxes, were on the front of some of the documents. Over the next almost week, a team of us located the records listed on this index. Much to our surprise, the National Archives is a virtual treasure trove of records for the Mormon Battalion. Most have never been located. Here are just a few of the muster and payrolls that we did locate. In addition to the muster and payrolls, there were officers' pay vouchers. This was a bonus we hadn't expected to locate. For units from the Revolutionary War to just before the Civil War, the records are in one entry in record group 217. This abstract form was prepared by Jeremiah Cloud, Paymaster number 7830. It is a synopsis of what other records are in the file. For each of the men on the abstract, there is a corresponding voucher. Jefferson's Hunt's voucher says he was paid $50 per month for commanding Company A, plus $7 for his servant, Milton Kelly. Sometimes you locate things you didn't even know to look for. Here is the death information and final inventory of possessions for Paymaster Jeremiah H. Cloud, who often paid the Mormon Battalion. He died in the service. While pension files have great information about the invalid soldier or the widow left behind, only about 30% of the men have one. In the Bounty Land files, about 90% of the men have a file. A friend of mine, Bill Hartley, told me that the untapped resource at the National Archives was Bounty Land application. Here is a file for just one man, Earl Justice. A team of us started the process of capturing them, but with the NARA limit on files per day, we couldn't get very far. We met a volunteer, Cindy Norton, who lived there and was volunteering once a week. Over the next year, she was able to get most of what we needed. So why do these records matter? This bounty land for George Sexton provides leads like age and where he settled that helped us to connect his whole family together. This letter from William Willis to James Scott's sister informs her of his death. It was sent into the pension office as verification of both his death and the relationship of his sister as heir. In this letter, Cornelius C. Workman, a man who had a brother in the battalion but stayed in winter quarters, provided details of the death of his friend Edwin Calkins. They traveled together for 6 months in California. Cornelius was the last person to see Edwin alive. He was killed by Digger Indians between Coloma and Sutter's Mill on the South Fork of the American River. Researchers did not know what happened to him. Addison Bailey provided some additional detail of approximate age and residence that helped us to find his family in a census record in California. This application for Richard Twigg Sanders challenges the family story that he was killed by Indians in 1858 in California. If legit, he is in British Columbia in 1878 in a mining camp. This document, provided by Charles Wright, details his illness and subsequent journey with the sick detachment going to Salt Lake, then heading to Oregon before finally arriving in Iowa. One of the requirements for the bounty land was to say where you had been since the Army enlistment. Often that allows us to track the man and differentiates him from men by the same name. So what else did we find at the archives? There's an old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. At the National Archives at College Park, they have an amazing set of pictures of Western Americana. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then maps, in my mind, are priceless. The cartography department has a boatload of historic maps. I came back with high-resolution scans of 90 historic maps covering both the Northern Trail as well as the Southern Trail corridor, and none of them are under copyright. I still want to go and explore further the maps at the Library of Congress. This letter is very informative. It's from 1849. It tells us that the cause of cholera is the soil, and they're trying to compare the soils in France with the soils in the United States to figure it out. This is a page out of Quartermaster McCossick's letter book, which mentions Price's Missouri unit and the Mormon Battalion headed for California, as well as Doniphan's regiment headed further into Mexico. We will learn a lot from sources like this. So how do you plan a trip to find your own treasures? I would suggest that you watch an introduction at this web address to tell you what the process looks like. One thing I have found challenging at the National Archives is to keep ahead of the pull times. If you don't keep yourself ahead of the pull times, when you find something that doesn't really apply or you aren't going to have to take a lot of time with, you don't have anything ready to occupy your time. So that has been a challenge for me. Be aware that before the consultation office closes at 4 o'clock, you want to have some pulls in for the following day. These are some pull slips that I had ready to go that I didn't get to on my last trip. The fourth one there might be of interest to you. It is an index to the letters sent to the Secretary of War. They have indexes like this for all of the major players, whether it's the adjutant, the surgeon general, the quartermaster, etc. They all have synopsises of their letters. The other thing, don't be afraid to go and ask the consultants. There's one for the Army, the Navy, the Homestead. There's a legislative consultant. There are so many people who are willing to help you in your research. Good luck on researching at the National Archives. Take it from someone who has made another 8 trips since I thought I had nothing more to do in 2012. There is always more to be done at the National Archives. As I said, I hope you have a wonderful time.